Dorothy Mae Henderson dropped her steaming coffee mug, the ceramic shattering against the cabin floor as her arthritis-gnarled fingers flew to cover her mouth. The scratching at her door wasn't her imagination after all. What she expected to find was maybe old Pete from down the mountain, caught in this God-forsaken October blizzard. What stared back at her through the howling snow was a tiny black bear cub, no bigger than her late husband's hunting dog, trembling violently against her doorframe. Sarah's scream from behind her cut through the mountain wind like a knife. "Dorothy, get away from that thing!" The younger woman's boots skidded on the icy porch as she stumbled backward, nearly taking little Emma down with her. But Dorothy couldn't move. Those dark, desperate eyes reminded her of something, someone she'd lost long ago. The same look her grandson Tommy had given her 20 years back, standing in this very doorway, begging not to be sent back to his daddy in Seattle. "Call the wildlife people!" Sarah's voice cracked with panic. "Right now!" How long did she have before this little one froze to death, and why did every fiber of her being tell her that making that call would be the biggest mistake of her life? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dorothy Mae Henderson had been rattling around her mountain cabin like a marble in a mayonnaise jar for 3 years now, ever since Harold passed from that massive heart attack while splitting firewood. At 72, she lived on a fixed income that got more fixed every month while everything else got more expensive. Her Social Security check of $1,247 barely covered the mortgage Harold left behind, let alone the heart medication that kept her own ticker running. The prescription bottles lined up on her kitchen counter told the story of a woman hanging on by pharmaceutical threads. Lisinopril for blood pressure, metoprolol for irregular heartbeat, and the big one, the expensive one, atorvastatin to keep her arteries from closing up like rusty pipes. $340 a month after Medicare, and this month she was down to her last 3 pills because she'd had to choose between medicine and heating oil. "Been choosing between my heart and staying warm," she muttered to Harold's empty recliner most evenings. "Ain't that something?" 2 miles down the winding mountain road lived the Thompson family in a double-wide that had seen better decades. Sarah Beth Thompson, 38 and stubborn as a mule, worked 3 jobs to keep her and 10-year-old Emma afloat after her good-for-nothing ex-husband disappeared into the Colorado wind 2 years back. Mornings she served coffee and eggs at Millie's diner in town. Afternoons she cleaned houses for the wealthy folks with their vacation cabins, and evenings she tutored kids online for $15 an hour. Sarah's monthly income of $2,100 looked decent on paper, but after rent, car payments, Emma's school supplies, and keeping food on the table, she was lucky to have $50 left over for emergencies. And emergencies seemed to happen every month like clockwork. Emma was the bright spot in both women's lives, though neither talked about it much. The child had a way with animals that bordered on magical, could calm a spooked horse with a whisper, had wild birds eating from her palm, and once talked a rabid-looking raccoon into leaving their garbage cans alone with nothing but a gentle scolding. "That girl's got the gift," Dorothy had told Sarah more than once. "Same thing my grandmother had back in Missouri. Animals just know when someone's got a pure heart." The mountain community of Cedar Ridge, population 847 on a good day, operated on the principle of minding your own business and helping your neighbors when the chips were down. Most folks knew Dorothy's financial struggles just like they knew Sarah worked herself to the bone for that little girl, but mountain pride ran deep, and asking for help was about as welcome as asking someone to count your money. Deputy Marshal William Crawford patrolled their stretch of mountain twice a week, checking on the elderly and making sure the seasonal hunters weren't causing trouble. He seemed decent enough, always tipped his hat to the ladies and asked after Emma's schooling. None of them knew the storm that was coming would change everything. The bear cub couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds, but when Dorothy scooped him up in her arms, he felt like he carried the weight of every choice she'd ever made. His fur was soaked through to the skin, ice crystals clinging to his muzzle, and she could feel his little heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Sarah, help me get him inside before we all freeze to death," Dorothy commanded, her voice cutting through the younger woman's panic. "Emma, grab those old towels from the linen closet, the raggedy ones I use for cleaning." "Dorothy, this is insane." Sarah's voice pitched higher as she reluctantly followed them inside. "That's a wild bear. He could have diseases, parasites, Lord knows what else." But Dorothy was already moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her hands, arthritic and usually shaky, moved with surprising steadiness as she wrapped the cub in towels. 25 years of veterinary practice didn't just disappear because you hung up your stethoscope and hid from the world. "Check his gums," she murmured to herself, lifting the cub's lip. Pale pink, not blue, hypothermic but not critical yet. His breathing was shallow but regular. "Emma, honey, I need you to warm up some milk on the stove, just barely warm, not hot. And see if we've got any honey left in that bear-shaped bottle Harold used to love." "You know about bears?" Emma asked, her fear transforming into fascination as she watched Dorothy examine the cub with practiced hands. Dorothy paused. The secret she'd kept from this mountain community for 20 years sat heavy on her tongue. After the malpractice lawsuit that destroyed her practice in Denver after losing the Robertsons' prize-winning collie because she missed the signs of bloat, she'd sworn never to practice veterinary medicine again. The shame had nearly killed her, and Harold had brought her to this mountain to heal from the humiliation. "I used to know about a lot of things," she said finally, "before I got old and forgot how to be useful." The cub stirred in her arms, making a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, wasn't quite a mew. It was the sound of something completely alone, asking for help in the only way it knew how. Dorothy felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally spill over. "Where's his mama?" Emma whispered, settling beside Dorothy on the couch. The cub's dark eyes tracked to the little girl, and something remarkable happened. He reached out one tiny paw and touched Emma's hand. Dorothy had seen that gesture before, years ago, in wild animals that had been hand-raised by humans. This cub had been around people. Recently. "That's what I'm afraid to find out," Dorothy admitted. "Sarah, I need you to help me look around outside. Something's not right here." They found the mother bear 50 yards from the cabin, half buried under snow and fallen pine branches. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. A tree, weakened by the storm, had crashed down, and the mother had been caught underneath, but Dorothy's trained eye saw what others might miss. "The blood trail doesn't match," she said, kneeling beside the massive form. "If the tree fell on her, the blood would be here, under the trunk. But look." She pointed to dark stains in the snow that led in a different direction. She was injured somewhere else and made it this far. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone shot this mama bear, and she used the last of her strength to get her baby as close to help as she could." Dorothy's voice hardened with anger she hadn't felt in years. "She could smell the wood smoke from our chimney. Knew humans lived here. She was hoping we'd save her baby." Emma had stayed inside with the cub, and through the window they could see her sitting on the floor, the young bear curled in her lap like an oversized puppy. The child was humming softly, and the cub's breathing had already steadied. "We have to call the wildlife authorities," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's the law, Dorothy. We could get in serious trouble." "That cub will die in a wildlife facility," Dorothy replied flatly. "He's too young, too bonded to humans already. They'll either put him down as unreleasable, or he'll waste away from grief." She looked back toward the cabin where Emma's soft humming drifted through the glass. Sometimes you gotta choose between what's legal and what's right. The wind howled around them, and Dorothy made a decision that would change all their lives. She was done being useless. She was done hiding from who she used to be. "We keep him," she said, "at least until spring." "Give him a fighting chance." Sarah stared at her neighbor. This woman she thought she knew. "Dorothy, who are you really?" "Someone who used to save lives," Dorothy answered, walking back toward the warm glow of the cabin. "And maybe it's time I remembered how—" Sarah arrived at Dorothy's cabin the next morning expecting to find chaos, furniture destroyed, perhaps an injured elderly woman, and definitely no sign of the bear cub. Instead, she found Dorothy humming Amazing Grace while scrambling eggs, and a small black bear sitting patiently by the kitchen table like a well-trained dog. "Morning, Sarah Beth," Dorothy called out cheerfully, not bothering to acknowledge the elephant, or bear, in the room. "Coffee's fresh, and I made extra eggs. Figured you and Emma might be hungry after yesterday's excitement." Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, watching the cub turn his head toward her with what looked disturbingly like polite interest. "Dorothy, please tell me you didn't let that wild animal sleep in your house." "Wild?" Dorothy chuckled, spooning eggs onto a plate. "Charlie here is about as wild as my late husband's hunting dog." "Watch this. Charlie, sit." The cub immediately planted his bottom on the linoleum floor, tail wagging like a puppy's. "Now that's impossible," Sarah breathed. "Bears don't act like that. Emma, get behind me right now." But Emma was already sitting cross-legged on the floor, and the cub, Charlie, had waddled over to inspect her shoes with gentle curiosity. When the little girl held out her hand, he sniffed it politely before settling down beside her with a contented sigh. "Mama, look at his eyes," Emma whispered. "They're not scary at all. They're sad." Sarah felt her resolve wavering as she watched her daughter interact fearlessly with an animal that should have sent them all running. "Dorothy, I need to know exactly who you are. No more mysteries. That examination you did yesterday, that wasn't guesswork." Dorothy's shoulders sagged, and she suddenly looked every one of her 72 years. "I was Dr. Dorothy Henderson for 25 years. Had a practice in Denver that specialized in large animals and wildlife rehabilitation." "Was?" Sarah pressed. "Until I killed a dog." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, but Sarah could hear the pain underneath. Prize-winning show, Collie belonged to the Robertson family. Beautiful animal, gentle as could be. Brought him in with what looked like indigestion. I missed the bloat, missed it completely. Dog died on my table while the whole family watched. Emma looked up from where she was gently stroking Charlie's fur. "But doctors make mistakes sometimes. That doesn't mean you weren't a good doctor. Try telling that to a community where everyone knew everyone else's business," Dorothy said bitterly. "Word got out that the famous Dr. Henderson couldn't tell the difference between a stomachache and a life-threatening emergency. Lost half my clients within a month." The malpractice lawsuit finished off the rest. Sarah began to understand the haunted look that sometimes crossed Dorothy's face when she thought no one was watching. "So you came here to hide?" "Harold brought me here to heal. Said the mountain air would clear my head and maybe I'd find my confidence again. That was 20 years ago. Never touched another sick animal since." Charlie chose that moment to stand up and walk directly to Dorothy, placing one small paw on her foot. He looked up at her with those impossibly expressive dark eyes, and Dorothy felt something crack open in her chest that had been sealed shut for 2 decades. "He knows," Emma said softly. "Animals always know when someone has a good heart, even if that person forgot they had one." Before Dorothy could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel made all 3 humans freeze. Through the window, they watched a patrol car pull up to the cabin. "Oh, Lord," Sarah breathed. Someone called the authorities. Deputy Marshal William Crawford stepped out of his vehicle, adjusting his gun belt with practiced ease. He was a big man, solid and imposing in his uniform, with graying hair and the kind of mustache that belonged in old Western movies. He'd been patrolling these mountains for 15 years, and everyone knew him as a by-the-book lawman who treated the elderly residents with respectful kindness. "Morning, ladies," he called out as he approached the porch. "Got a call about some kind of wildlife situation up here. Mind if I come in and take a look?" Dorothy quickly scooped Charlie up, holding him against her chest like a protective grandmother. "Bill Crawford, you've been drinking too much coffee again if you're seeing wildlife in my kitchen." But Crawford's trained eyes had already spotted the bear cub, and his expression shifted from friendly concern to professional seriousness. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need you to step away from that animal. Slowly." "This here's Charlie," Dorothy said defiantly. "He's an orphan, and he's staying with me." "Ma'am, that's a wild bear. Keeping wild animals is a federal offense, not to mention dangerous as hell. I've got to confiscate that animal and take it to a wildlife facility." Emma burst into tears. "No! Charlie belongs with us. His mama's dead and he's all alone." Crawford's expression softened slightly at the child's distress, but his voice remained firm. "I understand this is hard, sweetheart. But that bear could hurt someone. It's not safe to keep him as a pet." "He's not a pet," Dorothy said quietly. "He's family. Mrs. Henderson, I respect your intentions, but the law is the law. I can give you until tomorrow morning to say goodbye, but then the bear comes with me." "And I'll have to write you a citation. Could be looking at a $10,000 fine." Sarah stepped forward, her protective instincts finally overriding her fear. "Deputy Crawford, with respect, that cub will die in a facility. He's too young, too socialized to humans." Crawford studied the three faces before him, the defiant elderly woman, the desperate mother, and the heartbroken child. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to identify. "Tomorrow morning, ladies. I'm sorry, but that's how it has to be." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dorothy's kitchen as she sat at her worn wooden table, watching Charlie carefully eat pieces of apple from Emma's small hand. The cub had learned in just 24 hours to be gentle with his teeth, to wait patiently for permission, and to respond to his name with an alertness that seemed almost human. It broke her heart to think that tomorrow morning Deputy Crawford would arrive to take him away to what amounted to a death sentence. "He's different," Emma said for the 10th time that day, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Why can't grown-ups see that he's different?" Sarah paced the small kitchen like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried yet another wildlife attorney in Denver. Each conversation ended the same way: legal fees starting at $15,000, court battles that could drag on for months, and no guarantee of success. Her monthly income of $2,100 made those numbers laughable if they weren't so heartbreaking. "There's got to be something we can do," Sarah muttered after ending another fruitless call. "Someone who'll listen to reason." Dorothy carefully counted the pills remaining in her prescription bottle. 2 heart medications left, and her chest had been aching more frequently since the stress began. She'd already skipped yesterday's dose to stretch them out, but the irregular flutter in her chest told her that wasn't sustainable. "You know what's funny?" Dorothy said, settling into her chair with a heavy sigh. "I used to believe the system worked. Used to think that if you did right by animals and people, the law would protect you. Then I lost everything, because one family couldn't accept that sometimes good doctors make mistakes, and now I'm about to lose Charlie because the law can't tell the difference between a dangerous wild animal and an orphaned baby who needs love." Charlie must have sensed the sadness in her voice because he padded over and gently placed his head on her lap. The simple gesture of comfort from this young creature made Dorothy's composure finally crack. "I haven't felt needed in 20 years, she whispered, stroking his soft fur. Harold used to say I was the best veterinarian in Colorado, that I had magic hands when it came to healing animals. But after I lost that dog, after the lawsuit and the shame and watching my practice crumble, I stopped believing him. I stopped believing in myself. Emma knelt beside Dorothy's chair, her 10-year-old face serious beyond her years. But Charlie believes in you. I can see it in his eyes. He knows you saved him. Before Dorothy could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into her driveway made them all freeze. Through the window, they watched 3 cars park in front of the cabin. Deputy Crawford's patrol car, a white van marked Colorado Wildlife Services, and a pickup truck with official state plates. "Oh, Lord," Sarah breathed. "They brought a whole team." Deputy Crawford stepped out first, followed by 2 wildlife officers in matching uniforms. But it was the third man who made Dorothy's blood run cold. Dr. James Morrison from the State Wildlife Department, the same man who testified against her during the malpractice trial 20 years ago. "They're early," Dorothy said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "Sarah, take Emma and Charlie into the back bedroom. Lock the door." "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," Sarah said firmly. "And I'm not hiding," Emma added, crossing her arms. "Charlie's my friend too." The knock on the door came sharp and official. Dorothy smoothed her gray hair, squared her shoulders, and opened it to face her past and Charlie's future. "Mrs. Henderson," Deputy Crawford said, his tone more formal than it had been yesterday. "I believe you know Dr. Morrison from the State Wildlife Department." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his expression carrying the weight of professional authority. He was older now, his hair completely white, but Dorothy recognized the same cold assessment in his eyes that had dissected her competence in a courtroom decades ago. "Dorothy," Morrison said, his voice carrying false warmth. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough, James." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you've been playing veterinarian again. Old habits, I suppose." The cruelty in his words hit Dorothy like a physical blow, but she kept her voice level. "I've been caring for an orphaned animal that would have died without intervention." "Without proper training and facilities, you mean," Morrison corrected. "The same kind of overconfidence that cost you your license 20 years ago." Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between Dorothy and Morrison. "Dr. Morrison, I don't know what history you have with Mrs. Henderson, but that bear cub was dying when we found him. She saved his life." Morrison's gaze shifted to Sarah with dismissive efficiency. "And you are?" "Someone who recognizes compassion when she sees it," Sarah shot back. "Something that seems to be in short supply around here." One of the wildlife officers cleared his throat. "Sir, we should proceed with the collection. The facility is expecting the animal before dark." Emma chose that moment to step into view, Charlie in her arms. The cub had grown comfortable enough with the family that he relaxed completely in her embrace, his head resting on her shoulder like a sleepy toddler. "You can't take him," Emma said, her voice trembling but determined. "He's not just an animal, he's Charlie, and he belongs with us." Morrison studied the scene with clinical detachment. "Young lady, that animal weighs approximately 60 pounds now and will grow to over 300. It may seem docile, but wild instincts are unpredictable. It's a matter of public safety." "What about his safety?" Emma challenged. "What happens to him at your facility?" The question hung in the air, and Morrison's hesitation was answer enough. Dorothy had worked with enough wildlife facilities to know the reality. Young bears who'd been socialized to humans were considered non-releasable and were typically euthanized rather than kept in captivity for decades. "The animal will receive appropriate care," Morrison said finally. "You mean you'll kill him?" Dorothy said bluntly. "Mrs. Henderson, please don't make this more difficult than necessary," Crawford interjected. but there was something in his voice, uncertainty, perhaps guilt, that hadn't been there yesterday. Dorothy looked at Charlie, peaceful and trusting in Emma's arms, and felt 20 years of self-doubt crystallize into absolute clarity. She'd spent 2 decades punishing herself for one mistake, hiding from the gift that had defined her life, accepting that she was broken beyond repair. But this young bear had awakened something in her that she'd thought was gone forever, the fierce, protective instinct that had made her want to heal animals in the first place. "No," she said quietly. "Ma'am?" Crawford asked. "I said no." Dorothy's voice grew stronger. "I won't let you take him to die. I've lost too much already. My career, my confidence, my purpose. I won't lose him too." Morrison stepped forward aggressively. "Mrs. Henderson, you have no legal authority here. That animal is state property, and you're in violation of federal wildlife protection laws. Officer Crawford, arrest this woman for obstruction." But Crawford didn't move. Instead, he stared at Charlie, who had lifted his head to look directly at the deputy. The cub's dark eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably connected to the humans around him. "Deputy Crawford," Morrison's voice sharpened. "I gave you an order." Crawford's hand moved to his handcuffs, but he stopped. "Dr. Morrison, I've been patrolling these mountains for 15 years. I've seen plenty of wild animals, and I've never seen a bear act like that." "It doesn't matter how it acts," Morrison snapped. "The law is clear." Sarah suddenly stepped forward, her phone in her hand. "Actually, the law might not be as clear as you think. I've been recording this entire conversation, and I've been live streaming it to social media. We already have over 3,000 viewers, and the comments are overwhelmingly supportive of Dorothy and Charlie." Morrison's face flushed red. "Turn that camera off immediately." "This is still America, last I checked," Sarah replied. "Public property, public officials, public interest." Emma, emboldened by the adult's stand, hugged Charlie closer. "Charlie, show them you're not dangerous. Show them your family." As if understanding her words, Charlie gently nuzzled Emma's cheek before looking directly at Dorothy. He made a soft sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a purr, and reached out one paw toward the elderly woman. Dorothy stepped forward and took the cub from Emma, holding him against her chest. Charlie immediately relaxed, his breathing synchronizing with hers in a display of trust so profound that even the wildlife officers seemed moved. "20 years ago, I lost my confidence because I couldn't save one dog," Dorothy said, her voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. "I won't make that mistake again. This bear chose us and we choose him. If you want to arrest me, Deputy Crawford, go ahead. But I won't hand over a family member to be killed just because some bureaucrat is more concerned with paperwork than with life." The silence stretched taut as everyone waited to see what Crawford would do. His hand hovered near his handcuffs, his face a mask of internal conflict. Finally he spoke. "Dr. Morrison, I think we need to reassess this situation." Morrison's voice turned dangerous. "Deputy, you will follow orders or you'll be looking for a new job." Crawford met Morrison's glare steadily. "Some things are more important than following orders, sir. And right now, I'm looking at a family that's being torn apart by regulations that don't account for common sense or compassion." The standoff continued, but Dorothy could feel the tide turning. Charlie's presence had exposed something fundamental about the difference between blindly following rules and making ethical choices. The question now was whether courage would triumph over bureaucracy, and whether love could overcome the cold machinery of law. The tension in Dorothy's small kitchen reached a breaking point as Dr. Morrison's face darkened with fury. His carefully controlled professional demeanor cracked, revealing something uglier underneath. "Deputy Crawford, you are interfering with a federal wildlife operation," Morrison snarled. "I'll have your badge for this insubordination." Crawford's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Charlie made a sound that froze everyone in place. It wasn't the cute chirping noise he'd been making. This was deeper, more urgent. The cub was staring intently out the kitchen window, his small body rigid with alertness. "What's he looking at?" Emma whispered. Dorothy followed Charlie's gaze and felt her heart skip a beat. Through the trees, she could see movement, something large and dark moving through the underbrush with predatory purpose. "There," she breathed. About 50 yards out, moving parallel to the cabin. Crawford immediately shifted into professional mode, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Everyone stay calm. Mrs. Henderson, is there another adult bear that might be looking for the cub?" "His mother's dead," Dorothy said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Charlie's behavior was unlike anything she'd seen from him. This wasn't fear or curiosity. It was recognition. The movement in the trees came closer, and suddenly a massive black bear emerged into the clearing. This wasn't Charlie's mother. This bear was larger, clearly male, with battle scars across his muzzle and a distinctive notch missing from his left ear. "Sweet Jesus," Crawford muttered, drawing his weapon. "That's got to be 300 pounds. But Charlie's reaction was the most surprising of all. Instead of cowering or seeking comfort from Dorothy, the cub began making a series of specific vocalizations, huffing sounds that seemed almost like communication. The adult bear stopped at the edge of the clearing and responded with his own series of sounds. To everyone's amazement, it sounded like a conversation. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Morrison said, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his bureaucratic agenda. "That appears to be complex communication between the adult and juvenile." Dorothy watched the exchange with growing understanding. "It's not his mother, it's his father." "That's impossible," Morrison scoffed. "Male bears don't participate in cub rearing. They're typically solitary and often infanticidal toward young that aren't their own." But the evidence was right in front of them. The adult bear took several steps closer. His massive head tilted as he continued the vocal exchange with Charlie. There was no aggression in his posture, only what appeared to be paternal concern. Emma, with the fearless intuition of childhood, suddenly understood something the adults were missing. "He's been looking for Charlie," she said with absolute certainty. "That's why Charlie knew to come to our house. His daddy taught him that people could help." "Young lady, that's pure fantasy," Morrison began, but Crawford held up a hand to silence him. "Let her talk." "What do you mean, Emma?" "Look at how Charlie acts around people. He's not afraid, but he's not tame either. He knows exactly how to behave. Gentle with food, careful with his claws, patient when we need him to wait. Someone taught him that." Emma's voice grew more excited as her theory took shape. "And look at the daddy bear. He's not attacking even though there are strangers near his baby. He's waiting to see if we're going to hurt Charlie." Dorothy felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. The mother bear. She had injuries that were older than the gunshot wound. Healing scratches on her flanks. Bite marks that looked like they came from another bear. What if she wasn't protecting Charlie from the hunter? What if she was protecting him from a territorial dispute? The adult bear took another step forward and everyone tensed. But instead of showing aggression, he sat down heavily on his haunches, a posture that somehow conveyed patience rather than threat. Crawford, his weapon still drawn but lowered, spoke carefully. "Mrs. Henderson, in all your veterinary experience, have you ever seen behavior like this?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, watching the extraordinary scene unfold. "In captivity, occasionally. Breeding programs sometimes produce unusual bonding behaviors. But in the wild?" She shook her head. "This is unprecedented." Sarah, still filming with her phone, whispered urgently, "The live stream is going crazy." We've got 15,000 viewers now, and wildlife experts from all over the country are commenting. Someone from the University of Colorado says this could be the first documented case of complex social behavior in wild black bears. Morrison's expression shifted from dismissive authority to scientific fascination despite himself. If this behavior is genuine, it could revolutionize our understanding of ursine family structures. The adult bear suddenly stood and began moving closer to the cabin. Crawford raised his weapon again, but Dorothy stepped forward with Charlie still in her arms. "Wait," she said firmly. "Look at Charlie." The cub was completely relaxed, making soft chittering sounds toward the approaching adult. If there were any danger, Charlie would be the first to sense it. The massive bear stopped just 10 feet from the porch. Up close, his size was even more intimidating, easily 350 pounds of muscle and claw, but his dark eyes held the same intelligent awareness they'd seen in Charlie. Emma, with the fearless logic of a 10-year-old, stepped forward. "He wants to see that Charlie's okay. He's been worried." "Emma, get back here right now," Sarah commanded, but her daughter had already moved to Dorothy's side. The adult bear studied the group for a long moment, his gaze moving from Dorothy to Emma to Charlie and back again. Then he did something that made everyone question everything they thought they knew about wild animals. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture that looked remarkably like acknowledgement, even gratitude. Charlie responded with excited chirping, squirming in Dorothy's arms as if trying to get closer to the adult bear. But he made no attempt to leave Dorothy's embrace, instead settling comfortably as if establishing that both bears and humans were part of his family unit. The adult bear sat down again, clearly intending to stay close but not attempting to reclaim Charlie. The message was unmistakable. He approved of the current arrangement. "This changes everything," Morrison said quietly, his scientific mind clearly racing. "If we're witnessing genuine cooperative parenting behavior between wild bears and humans, the implications for wildlife management are enormous." Crawford holstered his weapon, his decision made. "Dr. Morrison, I think we need to step back and reassess this entire situation. What we're seeing here isn't just about one orphaned cub. This could be something much more significant." Morrison nodded slowly, his bureaucratic persona giving way to the researcher he'd once been. "We need documentation, video evidence, behavioral observations, perhaps blood samples to establish paternity. This could be the wildlife story of the decade." Sarah looked up from her phone, her face flushed with excitement. "The story's already viral. We're trending on 3 social media platforms, and major news outlets are reaching out for interviews." Dorothy felt overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of their crisis into what appeared to be a scientific phenomenon. "What does this mean for Charlie?" "It means," Crawford said with a smile, "that instead of confiscating evidence of a wildlife violation, I'm now protecting the site of a groundbreaking scientific discovery. Charlie stays with you, Mrs. Henderson, at least until we can understand what we're dealing with." Emma threw her arms around Dorothy's waist, careful not to squish Charlie between them. "We get to keep him?" "Looks that way, sweetheart," Dorothy said, her voice thick with emotion. "Looks that way." The adult bear, as if understanding that the crisis had passed, rose to his feet and began moving back toward the forest. But instead of disappearing immediately, he stopped at the tree line and looked back, establishing what appeared to be a regular visiting pattern. "He'll be back," Emma said with certainty. "He's going to check on Charlie every day to make sure we're taking good care of him." Dorothy watched the magnificent animal disappear into the trees and felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years, the thrill of being part of something larger than herself, something that mattered to the world beyond her small mountain cabin. "James," she said to Morrison, using his first name for the first time in decades, "I think we're going to need to work together on this." Morrison nodded, professional respect replacing the animosity that had defined their relationship for 2 decades. Dorothy, I think you're right. And I think the world is about to learn what I should have recognized 20 years ago, that your instincts with animals are extraordinary. As the sun began to set over the Colorado mountains, Dorothy looked down at Charlie sleeping peacefully in her arms and realized that sometimes the very thing that seems like an ending is actually just the beginning of something wonderful. 3 days after what the media had dubbed the Colorado Bear family miracle, Dorothy's quiet mountain life exploded into chaos she never could have imagined. News vans lined the narrow dirt road leading to her cabin, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking attention instead of sunlight. Mrs. Henderson, can you comment on the viral video? Dorothy, how does it feel to be America's most famous grandmother? Ma'am, is it true you're in talks with National Geographic? The reporters shouted questions through her windows while she tried to give Charlie his morning bottle, their cameras pressing against the glass like hungry vultures. What had started as Sarah's desperate live stream to save Charlie had mushroomed into a media frenzy that threatened to destroy the very peace they'd been fighting to protect. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, peeking through the curtains at the crowd outside. There are reporters from CNN, Good Morning America, and something called Wildlife Warriors TV. Emma can't even get to the school bus. Dorothy felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. The attention, the scrutiny, the constant judgment. It brought back every terrible memory from her malpractice trial 20 years ago. The difference was that this time she wasn't just protecting her own reputation. She was protecting Charlie and Emma and the fragile family they'd built together. "Maybe we should give them what they want," Dorothy said wearily, settling into Harold's old recliner with Charlie curled on her lap. "Do one big interview and then ask them to leave us alone." "They won't leave us alone," Emma said with wisdom beyond her 10 years. "I've been reading the comments online. Half the people think Charlie's amazing, but the other half think we're dangerous and irresponsible. Some lady from Texas wrote that we should all be arrested for child endangerment." The criticism stung more than Dorothy expected. After 3 days of round-the-clock care, Charlie had become as natural a part of their routine as morning coffee. He ate his meals at scheduled times, played gently with Emma, and had even learned to ring a small bell when he needed to go outside. The idea that anyone could see their loving family as dangerous felt like a personal attack. But it was Dr. Morrison's phone call that morning that truly shattered their temporary peace. "Dorothy, we have a problem." His voice crackled through her ancient landline. "The Federal Wildlife Commission is sending a team to investigate. They're concerned about the public safety implications of your situation becoming a model for other families." "What does that mean?" Dorothy asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means they're afraid that if Charlie stays with you, other people will start trying to adopt wild bear cubs. They want to remove him immediately and place him in a controlled research facility." Dorothy's free hand clenched into a fist. "After everything we've proven? After showing that he's thriving with us?" "Politics, Dorothy. The commission is more worried about liability than about Charlie's welfare. They arrive tomorrow morning with a full removal team." After hanging up, Dorothy sat in stunned silence. Charlie, sensing her distress, nuzzled closer and made the soft purring sound that had become his way of offering comfort. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same media attention that had initially saved Charlie was now endangering him all over again. Emma appeared at her side, having overheard the conversation. "They can't take him, can they?" "Not after everything?" Before Dorothy could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps on the porch announced another unwelcome visitor. Through the window, she saw Deputy Crawford approaching, but his usual friendly demeanor had been replaced by grim determination. "Ladies, I need to talk to you," Crawford said as Dorothy opened the door. His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "We've got federal agents asking questions about the night you found Charlie. They want to know exactly how his mother died." Sarah felt a chill of premonition. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggests they don't believe the tree-falling story," Crawford replied, his eyes avoiding Dorothy's gaze. "They found the bullet." The words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. "Bullet?" "Federal forensics team exhumed the mother bear yesterday, found a .30-06 round lodged in her shoulder blade. She was shot, Dorothy, probably by a poacher. The tree falling was just coincidence, or maybe she was trying to use it as cover." Emma's face went pale. "Someone murdered Charlie's mama?" "That's what it looks like," Crawford confirmed. "And now the feds want to know why I didn't conduct a proper investigation 3 days ago. They're asking if I was negligent, or worse, if I was covering something up." Dorothy studied Crawford's face and saw something that made her blood run cold. Guilt. Not the guilt of a lazy investigator, but the deeper guilt of someone carrying a terrible secret. "Bill," she said slowly, "what aren't you telling us?" Crawford's shoulders sagged as if he'd been carrying a crushing weight. "The bullet matches my rifle, Dorothy. My personal hunting rifle that I keep in my truck." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlie stirred restlessly in Dorothy's arms, picking up on the sudden tension in the room. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "You were with us." "You couldn't have—" "I wasn't with you when the mother was shot," Crawford interrupted. "I was patrolling the upper ridges that night, the same area where bears come down looking for food before hibernation. I heard a gunshot around 10 p.m., but I thought it was just hunters finishing up after dark." Dorothy's mind raced through the implications. "Bill, are you saying you think someone used your rifle?" "I'm saying my rifle was stolen from my truck 2 weeks ago and I didn't report it because I was embarrassed about the security breach. Now that same rifle killed Charlie's mother and the federal investigators are treating me as the prime suspect in a poaching case." Emma's voice came out small and frightened. "Does this mean they'll take Charlie away for sure?" Crawford nodded grimly. "If I'm arrested for poaching, my testimony about Charlie's behavior becomes worthless. The feds will have no choice but to treat this as a standard wildlife crime scene, and Charlie will be considered evidence that needs to be secured." The weight of their situation settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Everything they'd built, all the love and trust and hope, was about to be destroyed by forces beyond their control. Charlie would lose his family, Dorothy would lose her purpose, and Emma would learn that sometimes loving something with your whole heart isn't enough to save it. "There has to be something we can do," Dorothy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Crawford's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, federal agents requesting your immediate presence at the station for interview." "I have to go," Crawford said heavily. "Dorothy, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." As they watched him drive away, Dorothy realized that their greatest battle was just beginning. The federal agents arrived at dawn like a military operation, their black SUVs forming a perimeter around Dorothy's cabin while helicopters circled overhead. Dorothy watched through her kitchen window as men in tactical gear assembled equipment she didn't recognize. Tranquilizer guns, animal transport cages, and what looked like enough firepower to subdue a small army. "Ma'am, this is Agent Patricia Wells with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service," the lead agent announced through a bullhorn. "We have a warrant to remove the bear cub from your premises. Please exit the building with your hands visible." Dorothy's chest ached with more than just her heart condition. She'd taken her last heart pill 3 days ago, rationing them carefully, but the stress of the past week had pushed her body beyond what her medication could handle. Charlie seemed to sense her distress, pressing closer against her legs as she stood at the window. "Grandma Dorothy, what do we do?" Emma whispered, using the title she'd naturally adopted over the past week. Her small face was streaked with tears, but her jaw was set with the same stubborn determination that Dorothy recognized in herself. Sarah paced frantically. Her phone pressed to her ear as she tried to reach the emergency lawyer they'd hired with the GoFundMe donations that had poured in from supporters worldwide. "He's not answering," she said desperately. The federal court system moved too fast. They expedited the removal order. Through the window, Dorothy could see Dr. Morrison arguing heatedly with Agent Wells, his hands gesturing wildly as he pointed toward the cabin. Even at a distance, his frustration was obvious. The scientific study that had promised to protect Charlie had been swept aside by federal bureaucracy and Crawford's arrest on poaching charges. "Mrs. Henderson!" Agent Wells called again. "You have 5 minutes to comply voluntarily, or we will enter the premises by force." Dorothy looked down at Charlie, who was now clinging to her leg like a frightened child. In the past week he'd grown from 40 pounds to nearly 60, but he still seemed impossibly small and vulnerable. The thought of armed agents storming in to drag him away made her feel physically ill. "I can't do it," she whispered. "I can't just hand him over to die." Emma suddenly straightened up with the fierce resolve of a child who'd made an impossible decision. "Then we don't." Before anyone could stop her, Emma ran to the back door and flung it open. "Charlie, come on," she called. "We're going to see your daddy." Charlie immediately perked up at the mention of his father and bounded after Emma into the forest behind the cabin. Dorothy's heart stopped as she realized what the little girl was doing. "Emma, no!" Sarah screamed, but her daughter had already disappeared into the trees with Charlie. Agent Wells's voice crackled over the radio. "Subjects are fleeing into the forest. Repeat, subjects are fleeing. Child and bear heading northeast toward the ridge." Dorothy grabbed her coat and Harold's old walking stick. "Sarah, they'll never find them in those woods. Emma knows every trail and hiding spot from years of exploring, but she's just a child, and those federal agents will treat this like a manhunt." "What are you saying?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying we follow them. Emma and Charlie are going to need help, and I'm the only one who knows these mountains well enough to find them before the agents do." They slipped out through Dorothy's root cellar, emerging 50 yards behind the cabin where the forest provided immediate cover. Behind them, they could hear Agent Wells shouting orders and the sound of dogs being brought in for tracking. The trail Emma and Charlie had taken was easy to follow at first. Broken branches, small footprints in the soft earth, and Charlie's distinctive paw prints alongside them. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, Dorothy's heart began failing her in more ways than one. "I can't keep this pace," she gasped, leaning heavily on Harold's walking stick. The irregular flutter in her chest had become a painful hammering, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. "Dorothy, we need to get you back down the mountain," Sarah said urgently. "You're having heart problems." "I'm having heart problems because I'm about to lose Charlie," Dorothy replied stubbornly. "I'm not going back until I know Emma and Charlie are safe." They found them an hour later in a small clearing where Dorothy and Harold used to picnic during their early years on the mountain. Emma was sitting against a large boulder with Charlie curled in her lap, both of them looking cold and frightened but unharmed. "Emma Thompson, you scared me half to death," Sarah said, rushing to embrace her daughter. "I couldn't let them take Charlie," Emma said simply. "He belongs with us, and I thought maybe if we found his daddy, the daddy could protect him." As if summoned by her words, the massive black bear emerged from the tree line, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other adult bears followed him, a smaller female and another large male. Dorothy stared in amazement as the little family group approached without any sign of aggression. 3 adults, Dorothy breathed. "Emma, I think you found Charlie's whole family." The largest male, the one they'd seen before, approached Charlie and began the same soft vocalizations they'd witnessed at the cabin. But now the communication seemed more urgent, more complex. Charlie responded with excited chirping, clearly telling his father about their adventure. The female bear, smaller but carrying herself with obvious authority, studied Dorothy with intelligent eyes. Then she did something that made Dorothy question everything she thought she knew about wild animal behavior. The female approached Dorothy directly, sat down just 5 feet away, and began making soft, rhythmic sounds that were unmistakably communicative. Not threatening, not fearful, conversational. "She's talking to you," Emma said with wonder. "Charlie's daddy brought his whole family to meet us." Dorothy found herself responding instinctively, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue the way she used to calm nervous horses in her veterinary practice. The female bear tilted her head, listening, then responded with her own series of gentle sounds. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "Wild bears don't behave like this." But Dorothy was beginning to understand something profound. They're not entirely wild, she realized. Look at how they move, how they position themselves. They've been around humans before, probably for generations. This whole family group has learned to coexist with people. The sound of helicopters overhead suddenly intensified, and through the trees they could see federal agents rappelling down ropes. The bear family immediately shifted into protective mode, with the two males positioning themselves between the humans and the approaching threat. Agent Wells's amplified voice echoed through the forest. "Mrs. Henderson, you're putting everyone in danger. These are wild animals, and they could attack at any moment." The largest male bear turned toward the sound and let out a warning roar that echoed off the mountain walls. It was a sound of pure protective fury, the kind of challenge that made even trained agents hesitate. Emma stood up with Charlie still in her arms. "They're not dangerous," she called out toward the approaching agents. "They're family!" But Dorothy could see the tactical rifles being raised, the tranquilizer guns being prepared. The agents weren't interested in understanding the extraordinary situation they'd stumbled into. They just wanted to neutralize what they perceived as a threat. "Emma, Sarah, get behind the boulder," Dorothy ordered urgently. Her chest pain was getting worse, but adrenaline was keeping her upright. The female bear suddenly moved to Dorothy's side, pressing her massive shoulder against Dorothy's leg in a gesture that seemed clearly protective. The message was unmistakable. The bears had chosen sides in this confrontation, and they were protecting the humans who had shown kindness to Charlie. Agent Wells emerged from the tree line with 6 other agents, all armed and moving with military precision. "Step away from the animals immediately," she commanded. "They are unpredictable and potentially lethal." Dorothy looked at the bear family surrounding them protectively, at Emma clutching Charlie with fierce love, at Sarah standing ready to defend her daughter against federal agents. She thought about Harold, about the life they'd built together on this mountain, about the 20 years she'd spent hiding from who she really was. "Agent Wells," Dorothy called out, her voice stronger than it had been in decades. "What you're looking at isn't a dangerous situation. It's a miracle. And if you harm any member of this family, human or bear, you'll have to go through me first." The standoff stretched taut as Dorothy prepared to make the most important stand of her life, with a family of bears at her back and her heart literally breaking from the strain of loving so much it hurt. Dorothy's world exploded in a cascade of chest pains so severe she couldn't breathe. The mountain clearing spun around her as she collapsed to her knees, Harold's walking stick clattering against the rocks. Through the haze of agony, she could hear Emma screaming her name and Sarah shouting for medical help. But it was the bear's reaction that broke her heart, even as it literally gave out on her. The female bear immediately moved to Dorothy's side, using her massive body to shield the elderly woman from the chaos. Charlie squirmed out of Emma's arms and pressed himself against Dorothy's chest, his warm weight somehow both comforting and heartbreaking. "Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention," Agent Wells said, her authoritative tone softening as she realized the gravity of the situation. "My team includes a paramedic." "No!" Dorothy gasped, each word a monumental effort. "Don't let them take Charlie." The largest male bear positioned himself between Dorothy and the federal agents, his message clear. No one would approach without his permission. Even the trained agents hesitated when faced with 350 pounds of protective fury. Emma knelt beside Dorothy, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma Dorothy, please don't die. Charlie needs you. We all need you." Dorothy tried to speak, tried to tell Emma how much these past days had meant to her, how Charlie had given her back her purpose, her joy, her reason to wake up each morning. But the pain was consuming her, and darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. Sarah was on her phone, frantically calling for helicopter medical evacuation, but Dorothy could hear Agent Wells arguing that they couldn't safely land with unpredictable wild animals in the area. "They're not unpredictable," Emma said fiercely, her 10-year-old voice carrying across the clearing. "They're trying to help her." And incredibly, it was true. The female bear was gently nuzzling Dorothy's face, making soft, whimpering sounds that sounded remarkably like grief. Charlie had curled up against her chest, his small body radiating warmth. Even the two male bears had lowered their aggressive postures, creating a protective circle around Dorothy rather than a threatening barrier. Dr. Morrison's voice suddenly cut through the chaos as he emerged from the forest, having followed the commotion. "Patricia, what the hell is going on here?" "The subject suffered cardiac arrest during our operation," Agent Wells reported tersely. "We need immediate medical evacuation, but the animals are preventing our approach." Morrison studied the scene with scientific fascination despite the crisis. "They're not preventing anything. They're providing palliative care. Look at their behavior patterns. This is unprecedented cooperative behavior between wild bears and humans during a medical emergency." Dorothy felt herself slipping away, but Charlie's presence anchored her to consciousness. His small paw was pressed against her face, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed to understand exactly what was happening. "Charlie," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Remember? You chose us first." The sound of rotor blades filled the air as a medical helicopter circled overhead, looking for a safe place to land. Agent Wells was coordinating with the pilot, trying to find an approach that wouldn't spook the bears into attacking. But Emma suddenly stood up, her young voice ringing with desperate authority. "Charlie, tell your family to move back. Tell them the flying machine is coming to help Grandma Dorothy." To everyone's amazement, Charlie looked up at Emma, then turned to the adult bears and made a series of complex vocalizations. The response was immediate. All three adult bears moved away from Dorothy, clearing a landing zone while maintaining protective positions at the perimeter. "That's impossible," Agent Wells breathed. "A child cannot communicate complex instructions to wild animals." "These aren't just wild animals," Morrison said, his scientific excitement overriding protocol. "We're witnessing cooperative behavior that could rewrite everything we know about ursine intelligence and social structure." The helicopter landed with a thunderous downdraft that should have sent the bears fleeing in terror. Instead, they remained in their positions, watching with alert concern as paramedics rushed to Dorothy's side. 72-year-old female, cardiac arrest, no pulse," the lead paramedic reported. "Starting CPR and preparing for transport." Emma clung to Charlie as they watched the medical team work on Dorothy. "She can't die," Emma kept repeating. "She's the best person I know. She saved Charlie, and Charlie saved her, and families don't let each other die." Sarah wrapped her arms around both Emma and Charlie, her own tears flowing freely. "Sometimes people die even when we love them, sweetheart. Sometimes love isn't enough." But Charlie seemed to refuse to accept that reality. As the paramedics prepared to load Dorothy onto the helicopter stretcher, he broke away from Emma and bounded to Dorothy's side. Before anyone could stop him, he placed both front paws on her chest and began making a sound none of them had heard before, a deep, rhythmic humming that seemed to resonate through Dorothy's entire body. "Get that animal away from my patient," the paramedic ordered. but Morrison held up a hand to stop the agents from intervening. Wait, look at her vitals. The heart monitor that had been showing erratic patterns suddenly began displaying a more regular rhythm. Dorothy's eyes fluttered open, focusing first on Charlie's face, then on Emma's tear-streaked features. "Did I miss something important?" Dorothy asked weakly, and Emma laughed through her tears. "You almost died, but Charlie wouldn't let you," Emma said, gently stroking the cub's fur. "He sang you back?" Agent Wells stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "Mrs. Henderson, you need immediate medical attention. We'll escort you to the hospital, and we can discuss the bear situation after you've recovered." "There's nothing to discuss," Dorothy said, her voice gaining strength. "Charlie belongs with us. These bears—" She gestured weakly toward the adult bears still maintaining their protective perimeter. "They're not just wild animals. They're a family, and they've adopted us just as much as we've adopted Charlie." Morrison knelt beside the stretcher, his excitement barely contained. "Dorothy, what you've stumbled into here could be the most significant wildlife discovery of the century. These bears are displaying social behaviors that challenge every assumption about their species." "I don't care about scientific discoveries," Dorothy replied firmly. "I care about that little bear who's been sleeping in my kitchen and learning to ring a bell when he needs to go outside. I care about Emma having a friend who loves her unconditionally. I care about Sarah having help raising her daughter on this mountain. That's what families do. They take care of each other." As the helicopter prepared for takeoff, Agent Wells made a decision that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Henderson, the federal investigation will continue, but I'm officially classifying this as a unique wildlife research situation. Dr. Morrison, I'm placing the bear family under your scientific oversight. They remain with Mrs. Henderson pending further study." Emma hugged Charlie so tightly he squeaked in protest. "We get to keep him?" "We get to keep him," Dorothy confirmed, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. The female bear chose that moment to approach the helicopter, moving slowly and deliberately. She sat down just outside the rotor wash and made a series of soft vocalizations toward Dorothy, sounds that seemed unmistakably like well-wishes for a speedy recovery. "She's saying goodbye," Emma translated with absolute certainty. "She's telling Charlie to take good care of you while she and the others watch from the forest." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Dorothy toward medical care and a second chance at life, Charlie pressed his face against the window. Below them, 3 adult bears sat in the clearing, watching until the helicopter disappeared over the mountain ridge. "You know what's funny?" Dorothy said to the paramedic, monitoring her vital signs. "A week ago, I thought my life was over. I was down to my last heart pills, hadn't felt useful in 20 years, and was just waiting around to die. Now I've got a bear cub who thinks I'm his grandmother, a little girl who calls me family, and apparently I'm part of some groundbreaking scientific discovery." The paramedic smiled. "Sounds like you've got plenty of reasons to keep that heart beating, ma'am." Dorothy looked out at the Colorado mountains stretching endlessly below them, thinking about Harold, about the veterinary practice she'd lost, about the 20 years of hiding from her calling. Charlie's warm weight against her shoulder reminded her that sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. "You know what, Charlie?" she whispered to the sleeping cub. "I think we're just getting started." 6 hours later, stabilized on new heart medication and surrounded by more flowers than the hospital room could hold, Dorothy watched the evening news with Sarah, Emma, and Charlie curled up on her hospital bed. This is Diane Stevens with Channel 7 News, where tonight we have an incredible update on the Colorado bear family story. What started as a simple wildlife rescue has become an international sensation, challenging everything scientists thought they knew about animal behavior and the bonds between species. The reporter's image was replaced by footage of their standoff in the forest, showing the adult bears protecting Dorothy during her heart attack. As you can see, these wild bears displayed protective behavior toward humans that experts are calling unprecedented. The implications for wildlife management and our understanding of animal intelligence are staggering. Emma looked up at Dorothy with shining eyes. Grandma Dorothy, we're famous for showing the world that love doesn't have rules about what species you're supposed to be. Dorothy squeezed Emma's hand and felt Charlie's sleepy sigh against her shoulder. No, sweetheart, we're famous for proving that families come in all shapes and sizes, and the best ones are the ones you choose. 6 months had passed since Dorothy's heart attack in the mountain clearing, and her small cabin had been transformed into something she'd never imagined possible, a bustling center of love, learning, and second chances that drew visitors from around the world. "Charlie, breakfast!" Emma called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the comfortable authority of a child who'd grown into her role as the bear's primary companion. At nearly 70 pounds now, Charlie still responded to Emma's call with the enthusiasm of a puppy, bounding through the expanded cabin that Sarah's construction work had made possible. Dorothy sat in Harold's old recliner, which now had reinforced arms to accommodate Charlie's occasional need for lap time, reading through the morning's stack of letters. Correspondence arrived daily from families across the globe, some sharing their own stories of unexpected animal bonds, others seeking advice about wildlife rehabilitation, many simply expressing gratitude for showing the world that love transcends species boundaries. "Listen to this one," Dorothy said, adjusting her reading glasses. From a widow in Ohio. "Dear Dorothy, watching your story gave me courage to volunteer at our local animal shelter. I've fostered 12 dogs in the past 6 months, and each one has taught me that my heart is bigger than I thought possible. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start a new chapter." Sarah looked up from her laptop where she was coordinating the day's educational tours. Her new position as Director of Wildlife Education had transformed not only her financial situation, but her sense of purpose. "We've got 37 visitors scheduled today, including a family from Japan and some researchers from the University of Montana." The success of what the media had dubbed Charlie's Mountain had brought economic revival to the entire Cedar Ridge community. Dorothy's cabin sat at the center of a carefully managed educational program that allowed visitors to observe Charlie's unique behaviors while maintaining strict protocols to ensure his continued well-being and wild identity. Dr. Morrison had become a frequent presence, documenting Charlie's development and the ongoing relationship with his wild bear family. The adult bears visited regularly, maintaining a respectful distance from human visitors, but clearly checking on Charlie's welfare. The scientific papers emerging from their observations were revolutionizing understanding of ursine intelligence and social behavior. "The most remarkable aspect," Morrison often told visiting researchers, "isn't Charlie's individual intelligence, it's the family unit's collective decision to bridge the gap between wild and domestic. They've essentially created a new model for human-wildlife coexistence." But for Dorothy, the science was secondary to the daily joy of family life. Emma had blossomed from a lonely child into a confident young advocate for wildlife protection. She led tour groups with the expertise of someone twice her age, explaining Charlie's behaviors and the importance of respecting wild animals while demonstrating the profound bonds that could develop under the right circumstances. "The thing people need to understand," Emma would tell visitors, "is that we didn't tame Charlie. Charlie chose to trust us." There's a big difference. Charlie's daily routine reflected this delicate balance. Mornings were spent with the human family, breakfast, playtime, and educational demonstrations. Afternoons often included visits from his wild family at the forest edge, where complex vocalizations suggested ongoing communication about his dual life. Evenings found him settled between Dorothy's chair and Emma's homework table, a contented bridge between two worlds. The financial transformation had been as profound as the emotional one. Donations and tourism revenue had eliminated Dorothy's medication worries, funded Sarah's career change, and established a scholarship fund for rural children interested in wildlife careers. More importantly, it had given Dorothy the resources to create the veterinary clinic she'd always dreamed of, one focused on wildlife rehabilitation and education rather than profit. "You know what's funny?" Dorothy mused to Sarah as they watched Emma teach Charlie a new trick for the afternoon demonstration. 20 years ago, I thought losing my veterinary practice was the end of my story. Turns out it was just the intermission." The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Dorothy's malpractice lawsuit had driven her into hiding, convinced she was a failure as a healer. Now, her intuitive understanding of animal behavior was being studied by universities, and her methods were being adapted by wildlife rehabilitation centers across North America. Deputy Crawford's situation had resolved more positively than anyone expected. The FBI investigation had cleared him of poaching charges when they arrested the actual rifle thief, a seasonal hunter who'd been illegally baiting bears throughout the region. Crawford's honest cooperation and obvious remorse about not reporting the theft had saved his job, though he'd requested a transfer to a desk position where his guilt about Charlie's mother's death wouldn't interfere with his duties. "Sometimes I dream about her," Dorothy confided to Sarah during one of their evening conversations on the expanded porch. "Charlie's mother? I dream that she's watching from somewhere, seeing how happy and healthy Charlie is, seeing how much joy he's brought to our lives." "Do you think she knows?" Emma asked from her perch on the porch steps, Charlie's head resting on her lap. "I think mothers always know when their children are loved," Dorothy replied, "whether they're human mothers or bear mothers." The question of Charlie's future remained delicately balanced. He was approaching the age when wild bears typically established independence from their mothers, but his unique situation required careful consideration. The adult bear family's continued involvement suggested they weren't ready for complete separation, while Charlie's obvious comfort with humans indicated he might never be suitable for complete wild release. Dr. Morrison had proposed a groundbreaking solution, establishing Charlie as the first ambassador bear in a new model of wildlife education that maintained wild animal dignity while fostering human understanding. The program would allow Charlie to continue his dual existence while serving as a teacher for both children and adults about wildlife conservation. "The beauty of what you've created here," Morrison told Dorothy during one of his visits, "is that it challenges the traditional binary thinking about wild versus domestic animals. Charlie isn't either wild or tame. He's something new, something that couldn't exist without the unique combination of circumstances that brought you together." Emma had her own perspective on Charlie's future. "He gets to choose," she said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that continued to amaze the adults in her life. "Every day he chooses to stay with us. Every day he also chooses to talk to his wild family. He's making it work because love is making it work." The visitors who came to Charlie's Mountain left with more than just photos and stories. They carried with them a new understanding of the possibilities that existed when fear was replaced by respect, when prejudice gave way to patience, and when the artificial boundaries between species were dissolved by genuine care. Dorothy often read the guestbook entries aloud during their evening family time. Tonight's selection included, "Charlie showed my granddaughter that different doesn't mean dangerous, it just means special," and "This old rancher learned that sometimes the wildest things in life bring the most peace." As autumn approached and Charlie's first anniversary with the family drew near, Dorothy felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Her heart medication was working perfectly, her purpose was clear, and her family, both human and ursine, thrived under her care. "Harold would have loved this," she said to Sarah as they watched Emma and Charlie play in the evening light. He always said I had a gift with animals, but even he couldn't have imagined this. Charlie chose that moment to abandon his game with Emma and amble over to Dorothy's chair. At nearly 70 pounds, he was too big for lap sitting, but he'd developed a ritual of placing his head on her knees for evening pets and quiet conversation. "What do you think, Charlie?" Dorothy asked, scratching behind his ears. "Ready for another year of showing the world that families come in all shapes and sizes?" Charlie's response was the soft humming sound he'd developed specifically for these quiet moments with Dorothy, a sound that seemed to vibrate with contentment and belonging. Emma appeared at Dorothy's other side, leaning against the chair with the casual intimacy of a beloved granddaughter. "Grandma Dorothy, do you think we changed Charlie, or did Charlie change us?" Dorothy considered the question seriously. Around them, the Colorado mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and in the forest, she could see the shadowy forms of Charlie's wild family maintaining their evening vigil. "I think, sweetheart, that love always changes everything it touches. And when you're brave enough to love something that seems impossible to love, that's when the real magic happens." As the sun set over their mountain paradise, Dorothy reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. A desperate bear cub scratching at her door had awakened something in her that she'd thought was lost forever, the belief that every creature deserved a chance at happiness, that healing was possible at any age, and that the most beautiful families were often the ones that chose each other against all odds. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate that love knows no boundaries. But tonight, surrounded by her chosen family and filled with purpose, Dorothy Mae Henderson was exactly where she belonged. Dear friends, this story reminds us that it's never too late to discover new purpose, create unexpected families, and find joy in the most unlikely places. Like Dorothy, many of us enter our golden years feeling forgotten or useless, wondering if our best days are behind us. But sometimes life sends us a gift, a chance encounter, an unexpected responsibility, or a call to courage that reawakens the passion and purpose we thought we'd lost forever. Dorothy's heart medication crisis and isolation mirror the struggles many seniors face. Fixed incomes stretched thin, health concerns mounting, and the terrible feeling of no longer being needed. Yet when she chose love over fear, when she risked everything to protect something vulnerable, she didn't just save Charlie, she saved herself. Have you ever experienced a moment when helping someone else actually healed something broken inside you? What impossible situation in your life might actually be an opportunity for unexpected joy?